Thank you and love you in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, praise team. Y'all may be seated. Hello. Is this working? Yep, it's working. All right. Hello, everyone. Actually, I'm sorry. I have to ask you to stand back up again. I'm so sorry. We're actually going to be reading a passage together. That's on me, y'all. I'm so sorry. We'll be reading John chapter 1, verses 43 through 46. If you don't have a Bible, there are Bibles to the sides. And we'll be reading the NASB version. But if you don't have the NASB version, any version is fine. But once again, it's John chapter 1, verses 43 through 46. Give y'all a minute to find that. And then when y'all are ready, please read God's word together with me. The next day, he purposed to go into Galilee, and he found Philip. And Jesus said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, of the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael said to him, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." You may be seated. Okay. Once again, hello everyone. Welcome on this Sunday Sabbath. My name is Sungtaek Kim. If you don't know who I am, I'm one of the youth interns here at ARCHE, and I will be preaching for today's Sunday sermon. So, as we are continuing this summer series on the study of the 12 apostles, I just wanted to take the time to emphasize that we don't look at these 12 men as some distant and mythological figures within the Christian church that we cannot relate to in any way. But rather, as we continue to read and learn more about their lives, we will truly understand that these 12 men were real, living, and breathing people who also talked, lived, and walked with Jesus while he was here on earth. And as real, living, breathing people, we're also going to see over and over again, as Pastor Chris outlined last week, how these 12 men would still misunderstand, misinterpret, and just completely miss who Jesus is as the Son of God and as the Messiah. And yet, despite all of their flaws and all of their failings, we're going to see over and over again how Jesus shows grace and love upon the apostles to help them understand just a little bit more about whom they were following. Now, for this Sunday, as you can see from above, we're going to be turning our attention to the Apostle Philip. And this painting, once again, comes from the same art series of the Apostles done by Peter Paul Rubens. Is it working? It's not. Oh, yeah, thank you. All right. And so once again, we'll be looking at the Apostle Philip. Now, from the four Gospels, we don't actually see much of Philip in the first three of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, other than he was one of the 12 apostles. But when we turn our attention to the Gospel of John, that is when we actually see some of Philip's interactions with Jesus and who he was as a person in three distinct events. In Philip's first appearance in the Gospel of John, which was the passage that we had read together earlier, there are two details from this first encounter that made Philip's response so unique and so significant. That would be Philip's actions and then Philip's proclamation. For Philip's action, the first thing that Philip did after Jesus told him to follow him was to immediately seek out Nathanael to tell him about the man, Jesus of Nazareth. Now, we actually see a similar reaction take place a few verses beforehand, in which John describes how when Andrew, another one of Jesus' first apostles, when Jesus had told him that he was the Messiah, Andrew also immediately sought out his brother, Simon Peter, and brought him to Jesus, proclaiming that we have found the Messiah. Both of the actions of Andrew and Philip after meeting Jesus demonstrate the most natural reaction one would have when they have found something incredible. They go out to tell someone about it. And I think this is a feeling that each and every one of us can easily relate to. Whether it's this new TV show that we're watching, such as the fourth and final season of Stranger Things, or a new music artist that we just keep listening to over and over again, and we just want to share that music with one another. When we encounter something fantastic and captivating, our instant desire is to share this with someone, and to share this joy. And this feeling of wanting to share this joy with others is deeply ingrained within every one of us as being made in the image of God, and enjoying that fellowship with one another in that joy. However, it's not just the action and desire of seeking someone out that makes this moment for either Andrew or Philip important, but also in what they say. In verse 45, after Philip finds Nathanael, he tells him that we have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. So we're just going to pause for a moment and really reflect on what Philip said, and it's highlighted in red. It says, we have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote. Now, while we might not recognize as modern day readers the significance of that phrase, the people at that time, the audience, and also Nathanael would have immediately recognized it as the promise that both Moses, the man whom God used to deliver Israel out of slavery in Egypt and into the promised land, And the prophets, who were a group of prophets in the latter half of the Old Testament, such as Daniel and Isaiah, these people would have recognized immediately as the long anticipated promise from over centuries and centuries ago about God's chosen deliverer, this Son of Man, to come and deliver Israel out of the hands of their oppressors and into a kingdom of both righteousness and justice for all of God's people. It was this promise that both Nathanael and the audience at that time would have recognized, and that Jesus was the one that they were all waiting for. This was the claim that Philip was making. Which is why when Nathanael actually doubts Philip's claim about Jesus, a man from Nazareth, which has its whole other connotations, and we're going to see that when we study the Apostle Nathanael later on in the series, is that he doesn't understand how this long-promised Messiah that both Moses, the prophets, and all of Israel had been waiting for centuries, that Philip had somehow found this Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth. And so, Philip's solution to Nathanael's doubt was to simply say, "Come and see. Come and see this Jesus who you doubt. Come and have this one conversation with him, and trust me, you will believe in him in the same way that I believe in him." And then we see actually in a few verses later, Philip then brings Nathanael to Jesus, and in a single conversation, Nathanael joins Philip and the other apostles proclaiming Jesus as the Son of God and King of Israel. Now, in this first account of Philip, we see him demonstrate a simple yet genuine faith in Jesus that appears to show a deep understanding of who Jesus is as both the Son of God and as the Messiah, and that this was the Messiah that all of creation was in anticipation of. If we only looked at this passage alone, we would think that Philip has a faith that we should all strive for as Christians, that here he is, a model for what all Christians should have their faith based on. However, as we look at the other two interactions that Philip has with Jesus, we will see Philip's faith actually tested and gain a deeper insight into Philip's mindset. In Philip's second appearance in the Gospel of John, we find Philip in one of the most well-known events that took place during Jesus' ministry, the feeding of the 5,000 with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, a story we are all too familiar with. While the other 3 Gospels also include the feeding of the 5,000, which was actually probably more than 5,000, because it didn't include the accounting of women and children that most likely accompanied this large crowd, it is only in the Gospel of John that we see a unique conversation between Philip and Jesus. In the passage of John chapter 6, verses 1 through 9, we read the familiar story of how Jesus was teaching and performing great signs by the Sea of Galilee. And then as he goes onto the mountain and takes a seat, he then lifts his eyes and looks around and sees a large crowd before him. And it is at this moment that Jesus then turns to Philip and asks, "Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?" This he, Jesus, was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. Although it's not clear why Jesus himself chose Philip to ask this question, it is clear that Jesus' purpose behind this question was to reveal Philip's heart and to test his faith in him, which is then shown as Philip responded by saying that 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive a little. For context, a denarii is a day's worth of wages, and Philip is saying that even if they had saved 200 days worth of pay, which they didn't, it would not be enough to give everyone even a small crumb of bread. Now, while Philip's statement is true, he's absolutely right, don't get me wrong, and that they were not prepared at all to feed this many people with no food, no money, and no plan, Philip did not seem to grasp the most essential truth, in that he was standing before Jesus, the Messiah that he himself proclaimed to be. It's here in Philip's response that we then see Philip's heart and how his perception of God was still far too small. In just a few chapters beforehand, we're going to see in John chapter 2, 4, and 5, Philip had actually accompanied Jesus through some of his most greatest signs and miracles of his ministry, such as the turning of water into wine at the wedding in Cana, the healing of a man who was sick for 38 years, and the healing of a nobleman's son by simply saying, "Go, your son lives." After witnessing these signs and miracles, we would hope, and they should have only strengthened Philip's faith in Jesus' authority and power as the Son of God to accomplish any kind of miracle before him. And yet we see that Philip only focuses on the scarcity of what is before him rather than the wonderful abundance that Jesus, the Son of God, is able to bring. Now, the theologian John MacArthur actually provides a really great way of summarizing what Philip should have said if he was aware of God's power in Jesus. He should have said, you know what, Jesus, even though I'm not sure how we're going to feed these people, we don't have any food, no money, no plan. God, I have seen you do amazing things, signs and wonders that I myself could never imagine. So you know what, God? Here are these 5 barley loaves and these 2 fish. And God, I'll trust you to do it. But that's not what we see. Instead, we just see Philip questioning God's ability to provide by saying, we only have 200 denarii. What can we do with this instead? Now, how often have we also done the same thing ourselves when we believe that God was too small for us? Although Philip witnesses the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish, we don't actually see how Philip reacts to this astounding miracle and are left to wonder if something actually changed within Philip's heart. While we would hope that all of Philip's doubts, and even for ourselves if we were in that situation, would disappear, we are still left to wonder, how much did Philip's perspective actually change? And we're going to continue to see, actually, if his perspective has changed. In Philip's final appearance in the Gospel of John, we see Philip once again in one of the most significant moments of Jesus' ministry, the Last Supper. It is here in the Last Supper that Jesus shared with his apostles before he was betrayed into the hands of Rome to be crucified, that we see Jesus in his most vulnerable and most intimate settings, by the washing of the apostles' feet and the sharing of communion through the bread and wine, and promising that if we partake in this bread and wine, we are also partaking in him. It is here at this Last Supper, after Jesus had washed the feet of all the 12 apostles and comforted them with the promise that he would return even after his death and resurrection to welcome them into his Father's home, that we see Jesus say in John chapter 14, verses 6 through 7, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you know him and have seen him. Now, what Jesus says here is actually pretty much a summation of what he's been proclaiming all throughout his ministry in the Gospel of John. Basically, that if you knew Jesus, then you also knew God. And as we see in John chapter 5, verse 30, in which Jesus says that I can do nothing on my own initiative. As I hear, I judge. And my judgment is just because I do not seek my own will, but the will of him who sent me. Then once again in John chapter 8, verse 19, Jesus says that you know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. And then later in John chapter 10, verse 30, Jesus simply says, I and the Father are one. Throughout Jesus' entire ministry, he had constantly proclaimed, saying that if we believed in Jesus, we believed in the Father. That if we have seen and known Jesus, then we also have seen and known the Father. And that if we had Jesus, then we also had God the Father. This simple truth is something that was proclaimed all throughout his ministry. And we would hope that out of all the people, that the apostles themselves would understand this fundamental truth. And yet, after Jesus tells his apostles at this final meal, the most wonderful truth, that when we have seen and known Jesus, that we have seen and known the Father also, Philip turns to Jesus and responds with, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Philip still doesn't seem to get it. Is it no wonder then that Jesus then responded to Philip with saying, have I been so long with you, and yet you have not come to know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own initiative, but the Father abiding in me does his works. Jesus is speaking directly at the core of Philip's doubt and how his perspective of God is still too small. And once again, as modern day readers, we are amazed at Philip's initial proclamation of faith in Jesus as the Messiah, and then witnessing the signs and miracles of water to wine in Cana, the healing of a man who was sick for 38 years, the healing of a nobleman's son by simply his words alone, and then the feeding of the 5,000 with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. And yet, even after all that, Philip still says, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. And yes, while it would be easy for us as modern day readers to dismiss Philip as an unfaithful apostle and convince ourselves that, oh, you know what? If I was in Philip's shoe, I would never say that. Of course I would get that. Jesus, you've been repeating this over and over. Right on, I get what you're saying. But the truth is, as it is with Philip and with all the apostles, we are more like them than we think. I myself can testify to you that there have been many times in my life in which I have been completely wrong and missed the mark on who God is, and I've put God in a box far too small. Such as the time when I was going through college and I wasn't sure if I could pay for tuition or for my living expenses, I would pray to God and say to him, God, this problem in my life, it's too much even for you. And when there were strong seasons of doubt in my life as well, I would pray, God, show us the Father. Show me the Father, and that is enough for me. But the point is, amongst all those seasons of strong confusion and doubt in the existence of God and of his goodness, for both ourselves and for Philip, the most important point is that we actually see that Jesus is still there with Philip. And I think that's the point when we look at this intimate moment between Philip and Jesus. Even after Philip, one of Jesus' 12 apostles and closest companions throughout his entire ministry here on earth, even when he did not understand that he had come to know and see the Father through him, Jesus still keeps Philip with him. Jesus doesn't cast them away and separate him from the other apostles, saying, oh no, I don't want your unfaithfulness to contaminate them or your weak faith will weaken them at all. But no, Jesus instead speaks with gentleness and even with sadness because he wants to help Philip understand just how close God actually is. I would imagine he would even grab Philip's face. Don't you understand how close you are to God, the creator of the universe, and the one that you have been waiting for throughout all the ages? He is right here with you. I'm speaking with you this entire time. So how can you say, show us the Father? I pray that as we study these 12 apostles, that we are continually reminded that it's not them that we turn to as models for our lives as Christians or as people for us to place our faith in for our salvation, but rather that we see over and over again how even the people who spent the most time with Jesus, the Son of God, and had witnessed signs and miracles that both Moses, the prophets, and even ourselves have yearned to see in the coming days, that even these men would look at Jesus and still say, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. And yet, despite all of their flaws and all of their failings, Jesus never turned away from them and said, you're done. I picked the wrong apostle. You have fallen too far, even for me. No, but instead we see over and over again, when we would have quit, Jesus instead does not reject them or cast them aside, but he passionately desires for them to understand who he is and shows his grace to them in power and abundance. So when we look at the lives of Philip and of the other apostles, we should pray and we should not become disheartened at their failures, but rather be encouraged and to be rejoicing in knowing that God's grace, his love, and his patience covered them in more ways than we could ever know. And if this is the same God who through his life, death, resurrection, and ascension extended his same grace even to Philip, then we can also be assured that he extends that same grace to us. And so I pray that for each and every one of us that we really do take this time to reflect and understand that even when we say, Lord, show us the Father, and we ourselves don't seem to get it, Jesus is still there beside us, and he is not willing to abandon us. So I pray, let us take this time to pray and to reflect. And when you're ready, please join us together, all together as God's people in worship.